The free streaming service Tubi just added a ton of great movies on September 1st, and we're going to talk about some of the best and most underrated flicks that I recommend, but don't worry if you don't use Tubi. Many of these titles are available on other services like Prime Video, Netflix, and Peacock. You can always check my top pinned comment for details on where to stream these titles right now. But we're going to start this list off with a handful of action movies that include some bangers like Priest. This one's all visual. I mean, yeah, there's a story, but it's not a great one. In fact, the movie's a little bit ham-fisted, but it is a slick watch. It's got this incredible style to it. There's these wild, like, vampiric creatures living out in this desert wasteland. It's got a bit of a Mad Max thing crossed with, like, The Matrix. And even though this has not really held up as a classic movie, I think if you were to go back and revisit it, you would be surprised at, again, how slick this flick is. In fact, it would make a great double feature with Dread, a movie I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about because it was just featured on my Prime Video list because it was also just recently added to Prime. But on that list, I did talk about the similarities between Dread and The Raid, and wouldn't you know it, Tubi has added The Raid 2. Easily one of the best action films of the 21st century so far, like without a doubt. In fact, it's one of my top picks off this entire list. The action in it is unlike anything else, or I should say it was when this movie released. You've seen this action style, this real hard-hitting, brutal, grungy action that you get in The Raid. You see it fairly commonly now. I mean, both The Raid and The Raid 2 kind of reinvented the genre somewhat, or at least the way action is filmed. Even though it has been replicated quite a bit since this came out, The Raid 2 is still an amazing action movie and a gangster epic at the same time. In terms of quality in that genre, The Raid 2 is truly one of a kind. But another action movie from overseas that I highly recommend is Kung Fu Hustle. Now this one is an action comedy. In fact, this one's kind of like Kill Bill mixed with Looney Tunes or something like that. And even though you do have to read subtitles for all of it, most of the humor lands, and that's because most of it is physical comedy. But it's not just a silly movie. I mean, it is silly, it's very silly, but it's also, again, this dazzling visual feast of an action movie. There's so many great sequences in this that are just a total blast to watch. But speaking of fun action movies, two of the best action comedies ever made are also two of Arnold Schwarzenegger's best comedies. The Last Action Hero, like, there's no question this is one of the greatest action comedies of all time. It may not be your favorite, but it's certainly one of the best. And not just because it stars Arnold Schwarzenegger, but it was also directed by John McTiernan, who did the original Predator and Die Hard back-to-back. They came out in sequential years. And The Last Action Hero has the same sort of look that he created with those movies, the look of action movies in the 90s that he established in the late 80s. He brings that to the table here, and it's a wild, fun watch. But they've also added True Lies, a movie that is just so insanely over the top, and I think to this date still highly underrated. Like, obviously it's got some classic moments in it, but this movie is damn near 3 hours long, and it is packed with loads of huge, long action sequences, especially for back when this movie came out. Not only are there lots of practical effects, but also lots of real stunts, stuff that people get super hyped for today. It's all just shoehorned into True Lies in a really fun way. And then you've got that striptease from Jamie Lee Curtis that still holds up as like one of the hottest things in a movie like this to date. In fact, as far as big budget movies go, you don't see things like that in them anymore. I'm not really sure why. They've also added The Grey, a movie I've talked about recently because, again, it's available on some other streaming services, but it's an insanely badass man versus nature movie. I realize some folks get a little bit miffed by the way something like this might end, but this movie holds up as just a real raw, masculine flick. It's directed by Joe Carnahan, who did The A-Team, he did Narc, Smokin' Aces, and The Grey doesn't quite feel like any of his other movies, but it's still got that hard edge that he brings to screen. And then speaking of hard edges, they're adding Sicario, a truly badass flick that just feels insanely real at times. In fact, this movie starts off with a bang, and then it just has some incredibly tense sequences. While I was kind of a fan of the sequel, I thought it had a lot of interesting elements, it really was not as good and as solid as the original Sicario, another movie that I think most people have forgotten how solid of a flick this actually is. For some underrated dramas, they just added The Guardian. In this movie, Ashton Kutcher plays a high school swim champion that then enlists in the Coast Guard A School, which is where they teach their elite rescue divers. Kevin Costner plays his mentor, and it's an excellent movie. It shows a lot of how the training process goes, but then there are multiple rescues that happen in the movie. If you've ever been the least bit interested in how these rescues go down and all the training involved, this is an excellent movie. But even if you just want to watch something that kind of high drama with a bit of action that you maybe missed, this movie's nearly 20 years old and I think still holds up well. Arkansas is another one I think is highly underrated, but I'm a big fan of it. I've talked about it a lot here on the channel as it's hopped around on different streaming services. I would say if you've been watching Bad Monkey with Vince Vaughn on Apple TV, this could be a really nice transition. He's got an amazing character in this movie that will surprise you. I mean, he's not even the lead, and I think he just kind of steals the show, but the rest of the cast is really fantastic as well. You follow organized crime in Arkansas, which operates very differently than anything you've seen in a movie before, so all of that I think is just interesting enough to warrant a strong recommendation here. And they're also adding Hacksaw Ridge, a movie I think is highly underrated. Not only is this a great World War II film, but it's based on a true story, and this too stars Vince Vaughn and a really incredible cast, but Andrew Garfield is just amazing in almost every movie he does. He brings more than is required for his role to the table, and this is no exception. But then I want to tell you about a few comedies, and then we're going to get to some picks for Halloween. They've got a bunch of great horror movies that I highly recommend. But they did add The Hitman's Bodyguard, a movie it's a funny Ryan Reynolds movie. They actually added the sequel as well, but I just couldn't even get through that one. Talladega Nights, a movie I don't even really need to say anything about. It's just ridiculously rewatchable.
Give me a fastball, twist the line.
What the hell's a fastball?
Oh, no! Give me another.
But then my top picks actually include You Don't Mess with the Zohan. I think one of Adam Sandler's most underrated movies. It's classic Sandler, it's silly, it's irreverent, it's crude, but this one's just ridiculously funny. He plays this Israeli special ops guy, this like kind of lone wolf soldier that would rather be styling women's hair and making them silky smooth, as he puts it. Dave Matthews, of all people, is the bad guy in this movie. He plays like a white supremacist. It's ridiculous stuff. And then The Beach Bum, I think, is a highly underrated movie. This is actually directed by Harmony Korine, who had previously done Spring Breakers and a lot of really edgy stuff. And The Beach Bum, even though it does touch on a lot of edgy subjects, the movie overall is really not. Now, there's a couple of graphic sex sequences in it. The movie's got an edge to it, but you follow Matthew McConaughey as this beach bum, but you find out he's much more than that. He's actually a renowned poet who has kind of resigned his life to live as a beach bum, to drink himself stupid every night. And he goes on this kind of road trip somewhat. He basically stays around the Florida Keys, but he interacts with all these crazy characters. He's got a sequence with Martin Lawrence. Snoop Dogg's in the mix. Jonah Hill is like his southern lawyer. Zac Efron is a crazy drug addict that he meets in rehab. And ultimately, it goes somewhere. It's not just aimless. And it ends up having something to say. I mean, this is a movie I've thoroughly enjoyed multiple times. Not to mention the just absolutely stunning color palette this movie has, and an amazing soundtrack. I mean, Jimmy Buffett's even in the movie. So if you're a fan of any of that stuff, or just the least bit interested in the way I've described it, The Beach Bum is one of my top recommendations for the month.
Give me a Lucky Lotto and a cigar, would you?
Sure. You don't sell acid, do you?
No. That's too bad, man.
Now, before jumping to the Halloween stuff, I will mention that they added the animated series of Beetlejuice. Now, the only reason I'm mentioning that is because the new one comes out this week, and this was kind of a hit show back when I was a kid, so if you and maybe your family get Beetlejuice fever, this is a fun thing to watch together. But in terms of horror, they've added a ton of stuff. We've got Annabelle Comes Home, the more recent Annabelle movie, the Conjuring spinoff from 2019. Now, even though James Wan created the first Conjuring movies, he didn't direct that Annabelle spinoff, but prior to The Conjuring, he created a movie titled Dead Silence. This one's about dolls, and it's actually fairly creepy. I mean, it's a bit by the book, and it's not as good as some of his later work, but if you've been a fan of any James Wan movies and you somehow overlooked Dead Silence, it could be a fun watch for Halloween this year. Just don't have super high expectations for it. Vacancy is one I consider to be highly underrated. You've got Kate Beckinsale and Luke Wilson in a somewhat of a Texas Chainsaw Massacre style thriller, and it's really effective. I think that this one works out great. Same goes for The Mist. I think this is an excellent Stephen King adaptation for several reasons, one being all the practical effects they put in there. I mean, yeah, there's some CGI that looks dated, but overall, this is a strong adaptation from the director of The Shawshank Redemption and the first season of The Walking Dead. I also think that the Halloween remake from 2018 was pretty excellent. Believe it or not, this was actually co-written by Danny McBride, of all people. And even though I didn't really enjoy where they went with the remaining movies in the series, I did think they brought a legit Halloween movie to the table with this one. It didn't reinvent anything by any means, but there are a lot of terrible Halloween sequels, spin-offs, and reboots, and this one from 2018 is, I think, still pretty solid. Now, one that I think just got criminally overlooked just from a few years ago is Underwater, starring Kristen Stewart. And I'll say, I don't care if you've never been a fan of hers in anything before, because I know those people are out there. There's still a good chance you could enjoy this movie. I think when it was released, it suffered from, I believe, unfair comparisons to Alien. It's just not that type of movie. Like, yeah, they're in suits that are reminiscent of the space suits, and aesthetically, they definitely copied a lot of the look and feel from the Alien franchise. But this movie doesn't have ideas nearly as lofty as Alien. It's just a funhouse horror movie that takes place at the bottom of the ocean. It's a unique setting. The movie's got a great look to it, and it's full of some intense moments. So if you passed on this one, I do recommend it, again, with the right expectations. Now, here's a good recommendation loaded with amazing practical effects that still hold up, even though it came out in 1988. The remake of The Blob. Yes, this predates CGI and features a bunch of fantastic sequences with this giant gelatinous blob rolling through town, dissolving people. This version's full of gross out moments. It's got that great 80s vibe with the synth music. And again, this pink blob, and they got a bunch of great shots like this one. So if you're into that stuff, I don't see The Blob available on streaming services often, much less free ones like Tubi. That said, they also do have the 1958 version, which, believe it or not, stars Steve McQueen. Those two could make a real fun double feature leading up to Halloween. And then they just added Jennifer's Body, easily like Megan Fox's greatest movie, or at least the greatest one that she starred in as the lead. And I think that this one just got overlooked as well. People just did not know what to expect with Jennifer's Body, and it's a pretty funny movie. I mean, it's very satirical. I think it's incredibly self-aware as well, and it too has some gross out, just creepy moments in it. It's not just vampires or zombies or something you've seen before. No, like Jennifer's Body has an interesting core concept and then a good delivery, and I gotta say, Megan Fox, you know, she's hot as all hell and not the best actor. She didn't bring a whole lot to the table, but I will say she was perfect for this movie, and it still holds up today as this really fantastic satirical horror flick.
Today is the 1-month anniversary of the tragedy at Melody Lane.
Boring.
Another one that is just loaded with satire, though, is Slither, written and directed by James Gunn. This came out really long before he was a household name, but it was legitimately his first feature film, and he did it right. Not only is this one kind of a wild, old school sci-fi movie, but it too is packed with loads of gross out special effects. In fact, if you are easily grossed out, stay far away from Slither. But if you're into that stuff like I am, and you've enjoyed the humor in any James Gunn movies, whether it be Guardians of the Galaxy or the Suicide Squad, or even more obscure ones like Super, Slither fits right in with all of those, again, as a gross-out throwback horror flick. But my number one pick in the horror category just got added to Tubi, and it hit Tubi before I've seen it hit any of the other major streaming services like Netflix or Prime. Ready or Not.
Find her and perform the ritual. We're all dead.
Found her.
Damn it, Emily!
I don't know what I'm doing!
Now, Samara Weaving stars in this. She's just one of my all-time favorites working today. I love everything about her. And she's marrying into this wealthy family when she learns that on the wedding night they have a tradition. It's a somewhat purge-related tradition. It's hide and seek, except people die. Or at least the death of the new bride is on the table. And the reason this movie works with such kind of a ridiculous concept is it's very self-aware. Yes, the movie's got a nice look to it. They're in this nice big manor, but the family has all their millions from board games. A continuation of just the silly idea, yet it works. She's funny in it. A lot of the supporting cast is great, including Andie MacDowell. She's kind of the matriarch of the family, and she is a total badass in this. But it's got more than enough freshness to help it really stand out, making it one of my top picks for the month. Now, they've added a lot more. I'm going to show you a full list of movies I recommend, but if you like getting movie recommendations like this, please consider going to darrenvandam.com or just following this link to sign up for my free email newsletter. I send one email out every Friday. I make sure your information is protected, and that email has 5 movie recommendations, and it's stuff I've seen recently. Recent emails have included reviews of Twisters, Alien Romulus. I even recently did a long, in-depth written review of Longlegs. So if you want to immediately get my thoughts on new release movies, definitely consider signing up for that newsletter. Again, totally free, and it's full of movie recommendations. But speaking of recommendations, here's a bunch more just recently added to Tubi. You've got Boys in the Hood and Dead Presidents, which would make an amazing double feature. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is on there, but so is the whole trilogy with a fistful of dollars and for a few dollars more. We've got Pan's Labyrinth, The Fifth Element. I mean, a bunch of highly rewatchable movies. But that is the list. If your subscribe button is red, that means you're not subscribed. Definitely consider clicking it, and I'll make sure you never run out of good movies to watch again. But I'll keep making these episodes as long as y'all keep watching them. Thanks for watching this special Tubi episode, and you will see me on the next one.